Hey, Erik, thank you for joining us on the show. Happy to have you here. How's it going?
It's going great. How are you? Can you hear me okay?
I can hear you perfectly. Wow, you have a lot of books.
Too many to be.
May I compliment you on that? John Waters once said, he said, if you go to a bar, you pick someone up, you take them home, and you don't see any books, don't fuck them.
Well,
it shows your character.
Are you asking me out on a date? I'm a little confused.
No,
here.
I'm just saying I'm impressed because books are important. You need to have a lot of books. It shows you're well-read, well-rounded person. I love that.
Well, I love that you have a bookshelf in front of your bookshelf.
Yeah, well, that's actually, if you really want to geek out, it is a library cart. I have so many books that I bought a library cart, and as many books as on the outside. If you roll it around, there's as many books on the inside. So.
Oh, I love it. Double stacking is great. I love the smell of books. I can remember the smells of certain books I read during summers as a kid. It's the visceral experience where you're so involved, the whole world goes away. Anyways, sorry.
Judging from the conversation I just overheard, I would think you were more of a comic book guy, but I'm glad to see that.
Comic books also printed on paper.
There you go. No, comic books do not work on Kindle, I have to admit.
All of that, I do not like it at all. You are a documentary filmmaker. You made this. Tell us about Daytime Revolution, and I want to show the trailer so people get a taste of it. Tell us about your movie.
Well, Daytime Revolution documents a week in 1972 when John Lennon and Yoko Ono hijacked the Mike Douglas show. They made a deal with the producers of the Mike Douglas show to get, with complete creative freedom, to run the show for a week. And they put on all the guests they wanted, and they used that incredibly popular venue to speak to the silent majority of America. And they did such a good job of doing so that Richard Nixon went on a jihad to deport John Lennon. It took 3 long years of John's life as Nixon tried to get him out of the country. So quite the historical, cultural event.
And this was when talk shows were not so micromanaged or overproduced, or now it's almost like when you see talk shows now, it's almost an irrelevant medium. Like when you watch Kimmel and then whatnot, it's so overproduced. Like the responses, I know because I've been involved in TV, they will pre-produce. The whole conversation is fake. It's almost scripted.
The idea of a talk show, that kind of a talk show, a daytime talk show that would go on for 90 minutes doesn't exist in the culture anymore. But what does exist in the culture is podcasts. And say Joe Rogan show, which reaches massive amounts of people, goes on for 90 minutes to 3 hours. That format, still would work. But this would be the equivalent of, let's say, if Taylor Swift was a radical, taking over the Joe Rogan show for a week and programming every far right, far left liberal she possibly could, with Joe Rogan nodding and being very appreciative and saying, "Sure, take over my show. I don't care." That's about the only analog you could make for what this was.
Yeah, those old shows, I remember, this is when we talked to each other, when you had Dick Cavett. I mean, in-depth conversations.
About Carson would bring on Truman Capote and talk about books. Harlan Ellison, who I did a film on, would join Tom Snyder, and Tom Snyder would let Harlan go for 90 minutes railing about Star Trek. So, there were public intellectuals who spoke to people at the highest common denominator. So I have to say again, though, those venues exist today, but they're not going to be found on, 6 television channels. So lest we get too nostalgic and say it's over and there's no place to go to talk to smart people, there are. But you have to look a little harder for them than a menu of 8 TV channels.
Exactly. So, God, I remember the Tom Snyder show. One of the John Lydon of Public Image Limited was on Tom Snyder. One of the greatest bizarre interviews I've ever seen with a musician I love it. Like Tom Snyder was an inspiration. He smoked on camera. He gave no fucks. Tom Snyder was awesome. And that era of talk shows, they were the precursor. That's what podcasts are now, as you're pointing out. Like this, I feel like people crave authenticity. And that's what you did back then.
Well, yeah. And they, again, though, things are so fragmented that it's hard to have the same sort of cultural sway. And getting back to the Mike Douglas shows, these reached 40 million people a day, 40 million housewives. So to have someone like John Lennon and Yoko Ono bring on Bobby Seale of the Black Panthers, Jerry Rubin of Jerry Rubin, macrobiotic chefs, Chuck Berry, all of these amazing cultural kind of quantum shifts in consciousness was extraordinary. And it stood out. And that's why I wanted to make the movie. And I also wanted, you mentioned I'm a documentary filmmaker. Yeah, but in this film, this particular project, I was really in the transportation business. I just wanted to get people from the present day, from this fraught election year, back in time to reconnect up with 1972 and knock ideas back and forth across the 50-year gap. So there was a very conscious political message of this show, of this film, that was entirely intentional. And the fact that it came out in October and is now out on DVD after this traumatic election is not accidental. Let's put it that way.
Let's take a look at the trailer right now. I have it queued up for us. Alan, if you would. Here we go.
I'm 31 now, and I've grown up in many ways, and you have to be more politically aware in a day and age like this. It's almost impossible to close your eyes to it.
It was a time of considerable fracturing.
And you read in the newspapers that the war's over, but the war's not over.
You have to understand where the Mike Douglas Show sat in culture.
Here is John Lennon and Yoko Ono.
It was the most popular show in daytime television.
When President Nixon leaves for Peking on Thursday,
Yoko said, we're doing this show on Mike Douglas. We're having Bobby Seale and Jerry Rubin. And I'm going like, what?
Here is Ralph Nader.
Is he running for president?
No.
John Lennon and Yoko Ono didn't want us to talk about their music. That spoke for itself.
What would you like to talk about this week, John?
Love, peace, communication,
drugs.
Drugs, anything.
When I got to the studio, I got a glimpse of John Lennon and Yoko Ono. I said, oh my goodness, this is exciting.
They did have an agenda, and the agenda had to do with making the world better.
Yeah, it was something they were trying to get away with.
Well, young people are known to be cynical, and I say to them, nobody's smart enough to be a pessimist.
Imagine there's no heaven. People tend to think that somebody will save them, and there's only people can save us, only us all deciding to do something about anything, whatever it is. Just even making that decision that I want to do something is a start. Imagine all the people living for today.
Wow. That looks amazing. Let's go. We've got 1,200 people watching us live right now. We have questions for you, Erik, if you wouldn't mind.
Actually, I have one question, but was it a problem getting the rights to Imagine?
No, this is the second film documentary I've done with the Lennon estate and Yoko and Sean. And I knew after the first one that they were, I wouldn't say easy to work with, but they were good partners. So once they gave their blessings at the beginning of this, and as they control so many of the music rights, they made it a lot easier, and we could also afford it on a shoestring documentary budget. So the answer is yes and no. How's that?
Okay.
There you go. All right. Questions from our audience here.
Yeah, ADLs. What are Erik's thoughts on the upcoming 4 biopics from Sam Mendes about each member of the Beatles?
No thoughts. I mean, it's certainly an A-list project. it's going to be tough to top Nowhere Man, the film about John Lennon, young John Lennon, which I thought was terrific. And I'm not a huge fan of that genre in particular. I'm a fanatic Dylan fan, and I really have zero interest in seeing A Complete Unknown because I've already made the movie of what Bob Dylan was like then in my head a few times. So anything that they do isn't going to be as good as the movie I have in my head. But, you know, all power to the Beatles.
There you go.
All right, Darth Yeager. So if Nixon has succeeded in deporting Lennon, he might still be alive.
Absolutely right. It set Lennon on a trajectory where he was in the United States. He was living at the Dakota. That's not to say some nutter in the UK something. Remember, George Harrison was almost stabbed to death at Friars Park in his home. Yeah. So it isn't that there weren't insane people in the UK. And John was very much a man of the people. He liked to walk in the streets and make himself visible. But sure, there's a parallel history where everything had to line up the way it did.
ADLS, did the idea of them taking over the TV show grow out of their bed-in protest from 1969, where their activism became a primary part of their celebrity?
Absolutely. That, 69, 70, 71, when they moved to the United States, that's when they latched on to Jerry Rubin, and Jerry Rubin latched on to them, and they were heavily political. And these shows were the perfect platform for that. And what's great about these shows are Lennon never looked better. I think the only other John Lennon on film that's as good as this is Hard Day's Night. He looked great. He was totally in it, smart, funny, musical, everything you want from John Lennon. Just happened to be that period of January and February when they taped these shows. And then a year later was The Lost Weekend, where he kind of fell apart and moved to, the infamous tampon on his head incident at the Troubadour, where he kind of fell apart for a year and then became a recluse from 75 on. So this particular window into John Lennon captured him, which is one of the reasons why I wanted to make the movie.
All right, Red French Moon. My question to Erik Nelson: could it be, despite being from the left back then, but these rebels, that Lennon would actually be MAGA now, which is counterculture with Rogan and other to the mainstream?
I think that on one hand is absolutely not, but on the other hand, if Jerry Rubin on the Mike Douglas show had said, the president in 2024 is going to disband the FBI and turn the J. Edgar Hoover building into a museum of the deep state. We're going to put a woman to run the CIA, and she's going to dismantle it. And, some of the things that are being put forth from the new administration, that Rubin would have given a big thumbs up. These are very, very radical ideas that are being expressed. But I don't think Lennon would have been in favor of deportation, certainly, in his own life, and so many other of I'm sure he wouldn't have been a big fan of open carry guns for obvious reasons. So the answer, as I said, weirdly yes, but definitely no.
All right, ADLs. At the time was Yoko treated by American audience? How was Yoko treated by American audience compared to those in the UK?
Equally badly, both sides. Yoko, it's only been in the last maybe 10 years, I think, that Yoko has started to, if not be acclaimed, has been understood as the powerful artistic figure she really was. And there's a world, if we're going to talk about alternative history, where Lennon is in the UK and doesn't get shot in December of 1980, there's a future where he doesn't meet Yoko, and he ODs on heroin in 1968 before the Beatles record the White Album, which was absolutely a possibility with Lennon. He was going off the rails as a human being, and Yoko really centered him. And we may not have gotten Abbey Road if he hadn't hooked up to Yoko. So Yoko haters might want to kind of put that in their hash pipe and smoke it.
All right.
Yeah, and you can get a hash pipe. Erik, thank you so much for being on the show here to tell us about it. Is the movie? It's out now.
Yeah, this is the plug portion. So we're out on. Can get it on Apple. Just click on Apple, buy it, watch it, rent it, download it, do what you want with it. Amazon and physical media. We love our physical media now, don't we? It's out on Blu-ray and home video. And I saw it in theaters when it came out, and the home video looks better. And I actually re-edited the film after I saw it in theaters. I made some changes to it when I actually saw it with audiences that I said, ooh, I can make this better. So the home video is actually the director's cut, along with some supplements of uncut performances and all sorts of other stuff. And that, of course, is available at the usual suspects.
All right. Erik Nelson, thank you for joining us. You're I would say the most fuckable documentary filmmaker based on your books.
Oh, well, there you go. I think that's going to go on my resume. That goes right up on my IMDb page.
Yes.
Yeah, do
Put
it.
on the next DVD.
Thank you for joining us. And Daytime Revolution is out now on VOD. Get it, watch it. Thank you, Erik, for talking to us. And you have a great sense of humor. I appreciate that.
I do my best.
All right. Take care. Thank you.